I'm working on a really cool project where I'm using these large brass screws, but the problem is the biggest screwdriver that I have is nowhere near big enough and it's just marking them up and leaving them in a real mess. I could easily and quickly make something just to put these handful of screws in, but I thought it was an opportunity to make a really cool old-time screwdriver and it shouldn't take too long to do. I've looked through my pieces of high carbon steel, but I don't have anything thick enough, so I found this old file out. It's pretty worn out, so it'll give it a second life, and I'll use this for the blade. Let's get straight into it and begin with annealing the file. This isn't essential, but it'll soften the super hard steel and make it easier to work with. After giving it about 15 minutes in the forge, I'll put it in vermiculite. This will let it cool down slowly and hopefully soften it, or at least make it softer than it was. While that's cooling, I'll start on the handle and I'll use this awesome piece of wood that I've been hanging on to for a few years. My mate Luke gave it to me and I think it's either hairy oak or bull oak. Even though I'll be turning it on the lathe, it does have a couple of flats which will be easier to prepare now. I'm marking a line down one of the faces and then I'll take that around onto the ends, and that's to mark the centres ready to mount onto the lathe. Even though a tool like this won't get much use, I really enjoy these projects. They're not too difficult and I love trying to recreate old style hand tools. Even if it doesn't get much use, it'll still look great on the tool wall and it'll be there for the odd time that I do need it, like the project that I've been working on. First I'll roughly turn it down to round and from there I'll refine it into the final shape. Now I'll make some marks at certain points, like the widest and narrowest section, and I'll cut grooves to the correct depth at those marks. I'll then use the grooves as guides to get to the final shape. That will do for the turning. It's not a perfect finish, but I can finish it from here with sandpaper. I went through a few grits and stopped at 240. That's the handle done and it's now the next day, so I'll check on the file and see if it's softened up. I'm not surprised it bent, but I wasn't expecting to move quite that much. I'll straighten it out on the fly press and you can see just how soft it is by how it's bending back. If you tried this with a hardened file, it would just snap. It's not perfect, but it's much better. Now I'll start grinding it and try and true it up. I could have done this with the surface grinder that you can see behind me, but I wanted to make it with fairly basic tools to show what's possible, and also that's what I enjoy anyway. That's not too bad. Next I'll glue on a template and shape the profile. I'll do that on the belt grinder, but I could have done that on my latest addition to the workshop. It's a Waterjet cutter, and I'm super excited to get it going. So far all I've done is a couple of test cuts. I was thinking about the Wazer, and it gave me the idea to make a second screwdriver. It'll be interesting just to see how it cuts through a file, and this one isn't annealed, it's fully hardened. I really like the software, it's super easy. Then I just put the file on an SD card and get cutting. I'll continue with the other screwdriver with my original methods. I had no plan on doing this, but I just thought it'd be an interesting addition to the video. A bit more work now I'm making too, but if that's okay with you, it's okay with me. That did a great job. This is going to be awesome for prototyping, and when I need to make multiple parts, I can make a couple by hand and then the rest on the Wazer, which will save me heaps of time and help me get videos out faster. Anyway, I need to break the tab off, and then the edges will need a quick cleanup on the belt grinder, but pretty cool that it cut through a super hard file. I'll put that aside though and get back to the main screwdriver, and this one I'll do manually. I'll get into the corners with a file, and you can see just how well the file annealed in the vermiculite and how easy it is to file the old file. I'll flatten it a bit more before putting it into the forge to heat treat it and harden it again. Like I mentioned earlier, annealing wasn't actually necessary, as I could have used the surface grinder to grind it, and that's what I'll do with the second screwdriver. The surface grinder does a pretty nice job. I just need to clean up the edges from the Wazer, which will only take a couple of minutes. They're both prepared, but only the big one needs to go into the forge, as the smaller one is already hardened. It's had about 15 minutes in there, so I'll quench it in vegetable oil and then test if it's hardened. The 55 Rockwell file bit into it, so it's somewhere between 50 and 55, so that's just about perfect. Next I need to temper both screwdrivers and add some strength back to them. As they are, there'd be a good chance that they could snap with the twisting action, especially if they came up against a stubborn screw. I'm using a piece of steel to make the heat more even, and I'm watching the temper colours. When they turn blue, I'll quench them in water to suspend that state. Tempering is basically softening the hardened steel, but only slightly and in a controlled way. This isn't super controlled like a heat treating oven, but the colours are a good guide. The tempered pieces will be like a spring, which means they won't easily snap. That went well. It did introduce some warping, but that's actually very easy to fix using a carbide hammer. I've worked out where the low spots are, and now if I gently tap those areas on the inside of the bend, even though it's hardened steel, it will slowly straighten out. It really does work amazingly well. I'll leave a link in the description if you're interested in one of these awesome little Neroc hammers. I don't get anything for it, just helping out a mate who makes awesome tools. He's also a great guy who does heaps for so many people in the maker scene, and he really does deserve a shout out. Now the straight, I'll do some hand sanding. I did the whole thing to finish with 180 grit. The big screwdriver took about 15 minutes per side, and the little one took just a few minutes. That's the faces done, and the edges do need sanding as well, but they really don't take long to do at all. Next I'll grind the tips, and I'll do that using my new Broadbeck beveling table. It's made for putting bevels on knives, but I got mine because I knew it'd be super handy for all sorts of things. That's the blade's almost done. I just need to etch my logo on, and that's because I forgot to use my touch mark when it was in the forge. It does give me the opportunity though to add something a bit more elaborate. That's the blades finished, and I put Bowshield T9 on to prevent them from rusting, and off camera I made a handle for the second driver, so I'll put some finish on. I'm using boiled linseed oil, and then I'll make some brass ferrules. If you make one of these or a handle for a file or a chisel, you can just use regular plumbing pipe and size the handle to match the inside diameter of the pipe. It doesn't quite fit, but that's perfect. It's where I want it, so it'll go on with a push. Now I need to make a slot in the ends. When the blade is fitted, the slot will engage with the handle and prevent it from spinning. I'm using the blade itself to mark it out and lining that up using the jaws of the vise as a guide. This will ensure that the blade is in the correct position to the flats on the handle. I could have cut these slots on the milling machine, but I'll keep it simple. I got the fit a bit closer, but for the last bit I'll burn it in. And there they are, all done. The handles do need more finish on, which I'll do over the next couple of days. I reckon they look great, but I'll quickly try out the big one on one of the large brass screws. I know it's only a screwdriver, but that works awesome. I really enjoyed the project. I just need to find a spot for them on the wall. Hopefully you enjoyed the video and it inspires you to get into your own workshop. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.